At some point on a large project, you will need someone else or someone else's goods and services to supplement the capabilities of your own team. But how do you make sure you get exactly what you want and that you get good value? Well, the answer is procurement management. So, what is project procurement? Project procurement is the process by which we acquire goods and services from a third-party provider outside of our project. These can be goods and materials, parts and components, assets or equipment. Or it could be consultancy, professional advice, contracted staff, or just services. Projects can procure goods and services either from within their own organisation or from an external provider. For external providers, of course, you'll need to enter into a legally binding contract. For goods and services provided from other parts of your own organisation, those are usually bound, if at all, by a service level agreement or SLA. There are many different types of contracts that govern the way we procure goods and services and the way that we pay for them. And I am not a legal expert, so this is a brief introduction to the core ideas. Within your organisation, you're likely to have procurement specialists and indeed legal experts who will help you to get the contract form right. Let's look at 6 basic types of procurement contract that are common enough in the project world. The first is a fixed price contract. You will pay a fixed price for the goods and services agreed, which means all the risks to delivery sit with the contractor or the provider. This, of course, means they will have priced that risk into their costs, and therefore you will be paying potentially a higher price for the goods and services to reflect the risk that the supplier is taking. A variation on this would allow the supplier to secure a fixed price, but to also add on additional prices under certain contingencies. Sometimes this is known as a fixed price plus contract, or more verbosely, as a fixed price with economic price adjustment. The second type of contract is a fixed price with an incentive, or with a penalty. This type of contract adds a positive incentive, a bonus, or a negative incentive, a penalty, for the supplier to perform either to schedule or indeed ahead of schedule. Do note, however, that in some jurisdictions, penalty-based contracts are not legal. Next, we have the unit cost contract. This type of contract allocates unit costs to each component that the project might need to buy. You then buy as much as you want and pay the fixed tariff that is agreed at the start. And of course, if you're buying in volume, you should be able to negotiate a reduced unit cost. Often these are framework contracts where you buy from a catalogue. Fourth is the target cost contract. This type of contract shares the risk between the purchaser and the supplier. It sets a certain maximum price that the purchaser will pay, the target. If, however, the supplier can deliver below the target price, then the purchaser and the supplier will share the benefits. This approach to contracting, however, requires a high degree of openness and transparency about all of the costs. This is more than just about accounting. It's about making sure that you have a high degree of trust in the relationship between the project and your supplier. Number 4 is a cost plus contract. This is a type of contract that throws all of the risk onto the project. However, the advantage is that it allows the supplier to charge just their base rates without adding on a premium for risk. This means that rates can be lower with a cost plus contract than with most other sorts. This type of contract also requires high degrees of transparency and therefore trust, because of course the supplier will be declaring the costs it incurs so that the project will pay all of the costs plus an agreed supplier fee. This fee could be a simple additional fixed sum. It could be a margin on all of the costs. It could be an incentive or bonus based on the level of performance of the supplier. Or, of course, it could be some combination of all of the above. Finally, we have the all-familiar time and materials contract. This, again, places all of the risk on the project, but it reduces the burden of administration and oversight. The supplier will charge for its service based on a schedule of rates agreed in the contract and the time that it has deployed those services. This is very much the equivalent of a unit cost contract, but this time for services rather than for materials or goods. The materials part of a time and materials contract refers to any costs that the supplier incurs in addition to the time that its people spend. This can include subsistence expenses, license fees, travel, or training costs. Let's move on to the how of procurement management. And procurement management follows a simple 4-step process: planning, procuring, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Procurement planning. You start by creating a procurement plan, which will cover a number of things: what you need to procure, the types of procurement you'll use, the detail of your procurement process, any formal procedures, policies, legislation or regulation that you need to follow, the forms of contract or service level agreements you're likely to use, the sources of legal advice, preferred pricing mechanisms, the quality standards that you'll apply to the products and services, and also the KPIs that you need your services to comply with, the team that will be responsible for procurement, and how your procurement process will fit in with the timelines of other parts of your project. Cost estimates for each of your procurements, the governance process that will sit over all of your procurement, your bid evaluation process, and the authorities who will be making each procurement decision and on what basis. Any preferences you have among making, hiring, leasing, or buying assets outright. Whether you have any preferred, shortlisted, or framework suppliers already, and how many vendors you intend to involve in the process. You may also have prime suppliers with subcontractors or an intention to contract all things directly. Then there's your attitude to partnerships or alliances, and critically, any ethical requirements. These include things like sourcing, energy efficiency, and matters of modern-day slavery, many of which are legal requirements in many jurisdictions. And finally, your plan might include any sample documentation or templates that you're going to use in the procurement process. When you get to the procuring stage, there are 2 main steps: specifying your requirement and then market testing to secure the best deal. To specify your requirements, you need to gather what those requirements are from your users or your customers or your experts, and then to document them carefully. This means setting out quality standards for products and performance standards or key performance indicators for services. You'll also document things like applicable legislation and regulation, and things like delivery times that you need to meet. Then you can move into market testing. This is the step where you find the best appropriate supplier through a competitive procurement process. This is referred to as either market testing, competitive procurement, or a tender process. And I have a video, which I'll put a link to in the description, called Competitive Procurement: How to Run a Tender Process. Once you've finished the competitive process and selected your preferred bidder, it's time to enter into negotiations to finalise the detail of the contract that you're going to award. If the negotiation goes well, your legal team and the supplier's legal team will work together to draft a contract that reflects properly your understanding of the supplier's bid. This contract will contain the terms that you agreed on, things like a statement of the work or the goods to be supplied, timescales and schedules, inspection and evaluation regimes, quality standards and key performance indicators, product support and maintenance, change control or variation order procedures, price, payment terms and, of course, payment schedules, penalties, if you use them and they're not legal in all jurisdictions, or bonuses, reporting processes, and any of the principal roles and responsibilities in the procurement or contract management process, confidentiality, intellectual property rights, data protection obligations, and how the contract may or may not be terminated. And then, of course, there's all those basic legal boilerplate things. Limitations on liabilities, warranties, insurances, performance bonds, assignments, dealing with disputes, and governing jurisdiction. Monitoring and controlling. Once you've entered into the contract, the work starts and the goods or services are supplied. Now, you need to monitor the contract performance. This is a mix of formal and informal activities that monitor your relationship with your supplier. It starts with administering the contract and making sure that both parties are fulfilling their obligations. Then there's monitoring performance against quality standards, performance standards, and KPIs. You may also carry out occasional formal procurement performance reviews. Going one step further, your organisation may also carry out a procurement performance audit. Of course, if there are any deviations in the performance of the contract, then you need to deal with those. Otherwise, you'll be making your payments against delivery and contract milestones. But of course, things also change, so there may be contract variations, variation orders, or changes that you need to process, or working with the supplier to get things right. And finally, that may of course mean updates to your plan and your documentation, and maybe also your budget. It's helpful to think of closing as a specific stage in your project procurement process. The basic closing tasks include things like ensuring that your suppliers have met all of their contract performance criteria, conducting formal handovers or acceptances, documenting and addressing any outstanding issues, any snagging, any claims or payments, ensuring you have all of the necessary documents for maintenance and for end-of-life procedures on major assets, finalising all payments and meeting all invoices, and attending to a formal contract closure, documenting and archiving the whole process. Finally, of course, carrying out a lessons learned review so that the project team can learn from the procurement process. Finally, it's worth saying a word or two about public sector procurement, because whilst public sector procurement follows the same basic process as all commercial procurement, often there are some additional rules, regulations, or legal constraints, and quite often there's also a requirement for a deal more rigour and transparency in the process. Public sector procurement in many countries is bound by national and often supranational legislation and regulation. These regulations impose obligations regarding things like fair competition, openness to bidders, reasonable timescales, and disclosure of certain information. Almost certainly, if you're conducting a procurement in a public sector organisation, you will need access to a large amount of policy, procedure, regulation and legislation. And you'll probably need experts to help you interpret it to make sure that you follow it. In the private sector, we're often far freer to buy from whomever we choose and to apply the contract form and conditions that suit us commercially. However, many of the best commercial organisations still apply procurement processes that are every bit as rigorous and transparent as those used in the public sector. Please do give this video a like if you've enjoyed it or learned from it. I'll be making loads more great project management videos for you, so please do subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of them. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.